Now we're going to move to our perspective guest on the programme, and she's been described as a black, lesbian, feminist warrior, poet and writer who dedicated her life to talents to confronting different forms of injustice. Now that is a quote about the famous American writer Audre Lorde, but perhaps it could equally apply to my guest on the programme today, who has written herself about Lorde and her life. Alexis Pauline Gumbs is author of the new biography. It's called Survival is a Promise, The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde, and she's also author of Undrowned, which has been out in English for a couple of years since 2022, but it's just been translated as well into French as Non-noyées. We'll talk about this book in just a moment. But first of all, welcome to you. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us.
Thanks so much for having me.
For people who don't know Audre Lorde, just tell us a bit about her and why we should feel as passionate about her work as you obviously do.
Oh, I don't have enough time to say everything that I want to say to you about Audre Lorde, but she was born in 1934, and she was part of that first generation that grew up with the atomic bomb existing. So she's a theorist of survival, and from an early age, she was critical of US nuclear policies, and she used poetry as her primary technology to really work with people around how powerful we are. How could we actually become the bravest, most powerful version of ourselves? And so I think in this moment, like every moment, but I'm thinking especially of the stories that you're presenting today, we really need to be that version of ourselves.
And I made that link between her and yourself at the beginning. Is that fair? Is that justified, do you think? Do you see very much of her in you or see yourself in her?
It would not be possible for me to be who I am without her. So I see her as elemental to the existence of myself, so many people in my generation who are able to be proud, out, queer, black feminists, understanding that we have a responsibility to change the world. And so this biography really comes out of my gratitude.
And the time that you spent ages doing, didn't you, going through her manuscript archives to be able to write this book. Tell us about that process.
Well, so Audre Lorde was a trained librarian herself, and she kept so much. So her journals, her drafts, other people's writing that influenced her, so much correspondence, and it was great to be able to spend time. I mean, I have been spending years, and I love the archivist at Spelman College, which is where her papers are, but I also visited many other archives to see what she had sent, to her correspondence, and it's a form of intimacy that I think of as sacred. I think it's an energy exchange. I think there's something powerful about touching the objects, especially the written, energetic objects of a writer. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity.
And you found quite a lot of things that perhaps are a little bit less well known about her interest as well, and engagement with the natural world, about geology, about meteorology, about biology as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's right there in the poetry, but the way that she's been talked about hasn't been as an environmental thinker, which she was. I mean, she always was from a very young age, and an environmental activist.
Let's talk a bit more about the main threads of her work. As you mentioned, being able to speak out as a black person, as a lesbian as well, and as you said, as a warrior. I mean, what is it that she achieved, do you think, and what is her legacy be?
When Audre Lorde was growing up in the 1930s and 40s, she felt like she was the only black lesbian on the planet, right? She felt profoundly alone. And what she's done with her work is she has made it so I never have to feel alone. That so many of us who feel like we are bravely speaking our own truths understand that we have generations before us. And we have her as a powerful example of someone who really, at cost to her own life, her own career, was truthful about who she was, right? That was her most powerful work, and she encouraged other people to be not only more honest with themselves, but really true to their purpose on this planet.
She's obviously achieved a lot, and people like yourself keep that legacy and those traditions going. There's a long way to go, though, isn't there?
I think so. I think that I mourn the fact that I think if we listen to people like Audre Lorde decades ago, we wouldn't be in the space of environmental crisis that we're in right now. I think we would have a lot more progress towards the peace that we actually need to cultivate within our species, and the possibility of being in right relationship with the planet as a whole. So I wish that people had been listening to Audre Lorde sooner, but also now is a great time to start listening to her words and her ideas.
If people are interested, of course the two books would take that up. Let's talk about the second book as well. As I say, it's called Non-noyées, just translated into French, but it's been out in English since 2022. I'm going to read the title because it's a great title. Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons for Marine Mammals as well. What's it about? What's the theory behind this book?
It's really about our kinship as a planet. And this is following in the steps of Audre Lorde. But in 2018, I started to write these meditations about how could I be a better marine mammal, understanding that the ocean is rising, understanding that we're all connected through water and breathing. How could I think about the lessons for survival and the lessons about being in a depth of circumstance like we are in a depth of circumstance right now, in a graceful way, in a loving way, in a way that is in tune with how this planet is changing.
And what are we getting wrong? I mean, here on France 24, other news channels as well, we're constantly reporting all the constant problems of today, a lot about the environment as well, but about the conflicts, as you mentioned earlier on. Obviously, we're not getting it right, are we?
No, and I think that the major problem, and this is what colonialism requires and means, is this idea of separation, like that we are separate from this planet. We just happen to be here. And so it doesn't matter if we pollute the ocean, it doesn't matter if we destroy the atmosphere. But of course it matters because we're part of this planet. We've never been separate from this planet. We have no opportunity for survival separate from this planet. And the same is true for our relationships with each other. So when Audre Lorde talked about the creative power of difference, she was talking about the fact that as long as we can believe that we're inherently separate from another person or another group of people, as we're seeing in the violence all over the world right now, we will harm ourselves. We will make this place unlivable for ourselves and for our future generations, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Do you think people like you are able to influence others who are, either involved in conflict or who are ignoring the problems of the environment?
I hope so. The phrase that's most repeated in the book Undrowned is, "I love you." So there's this hope that if people actually remember that we are loved, that anyone can tap into that feeling of what it is to be loved, that we can possibly lay down our armor and remember how connected we are and come from a place of purpose as opposed from a place of fear.
I'm going to read another quote. I loved a phrase that I found on your website about yourself. Queer, black troublemaker and black feminist, love evangelist, and an aspirational cousin to all sentient beings. I mean, it's not obviously about writing for you, is it? It's about writing for other people, about helping other people as well.
It's about relationship, right? And I'm so grateful to be your relation, to be related to everyone listening to this right now. And what if we acted like we were all relatives? What would we do? Who would we be in service of each other?
And are we able to help each other, do you think, in that way, by interconnecting more?
I think so. And remembering that we're inherently interconnected. I can't harm you without harming myself. And I think that there's so many examples of that. I wish that all day what you got to report on were all of those examples. But as long as fear is what determines our actions, whether it's fear of not having enough money, whether it's fear of another group of people, if that's what determines our actions, we won't be able to help each other. If we ground into that love that's already there, then we can do anything.
Finally, if Audre Lorde was still with us today, I mean, what do you think she would be thinking, seeing the way things have changed since she was growing up? The positives and the negatives, I suppose, about how life is very different now on the planet compared to when she was around.
I think she'd be very proud of her impact. I think that she's, this biography is the New York Public Library's best biography of the year, and that's the library she grew up in, right? And she didn't see herself reflected in that space. So it means a lot that that same library is recommending for people to learn about her life. And I'm very proud of that too. But I also think that a lot of her critique would still stand. and her critiques of the United States, of the United States military, of United States military funding, unfortunately still apply. So I think that we need her voice as much as we ever have. And if she were alive now, she would be 90 years old, and I think she would be a radical elder speaking those truths and still, outspoken for justice, love, and the possibility of freedom.
I can just imagine it. Thanks so much for coming in and talking to us today.
Thanks
the two books then, Survival as a Promise by Alexis Pauline Gumbs, and you're here for a book signing, aren't you, for the French version? It's tonight, you said?
Yes, tonight at 7 at Maison de Poésie.
Okay, well, if you want to go along to that, Maison de Poésie for the French book, Non-noyées. Thanks for coming in and talking to us once again on the programme.
Thank you.